Every winter, blizzards, freezing rain, and months of sub-zero cold wipe out entire populations of animals that are perfectly built for cold. So how did a mostly hairless, tropical-born species survive ice ages that lasted thousands of years? For most of human history, winter wasn't just uncomfortable, it was the single deadliest season of the year. No fur, no thick fat layer like a seal or a bear, and for a long stretch of prehistory, no fire either. And yet, humans didn't just survive winter, they eventually spread into some of the coldest places on Earth, from the frozen steppes of Siberia to the Arctic Circle. This is the story of how they pulled that off. Let's start with the obvious problem. Around 2 million years ago, early humans were already losing their body hair, adapting for a hot savanna, not a frozen tundra. For a species built to cool down, not warm up, this should have been a massive disadvantage the moment any group wandered north. And yet, over the following hundreds of thousands of years, human populations kept pushing further from the equator, out of Africa, into Europe and Asia, into places with harsh winters, deep snow, and temperatures that could kill an unprepared person in a matter of hours. Every single step into colder territory should have been a step toward extinction. Instead, it became one of the greatest survival stories in the history of life on Earth. So the first and most important survival tool wasn't a body adaptation at all. It was a discovery of fire. Evidence of controlled fire use goes back at least 1 million years. And by the time humans were living through ice ages, fire wasn't a luxury. It was the difference between life and death. A fire meant warmth through the long freezing nights, when temperatures could drop even further than during the day. It meant a way to cook meat and extract far more calories from food than eating it raw, which mattered enormously in an environment where every calorie was harder to come by. It meant protection from predators who were also desperate to get out of the cold and just as willing to attack a sleeping group. And it meant a gathering point, a literal center of a community that kept people together instead of scattering off alone to find whatever shelter they could. Groups that mastered fire could occupy colder regions than any group without it, and that single advantage compounded generation after generation. In a very real sense, fire is the reason humans could live somewhere their bodies alone never should have allowed. But fire alone doesn't keep you warm while you're out hunting, gathering, or traveling across open snow. Ancient humans needed a second invention almost as important as fire itself: clothing. Unlike a fur coat, human clothing wasn't just a single fixed adaptation locked in by evolution. It was flexible, adjustable, and improvable, and that flexibility turned out to be a massive advantage over waiting thousands of generations for biology to catch up. Early humans used stone tools to scrape hides clean, treat them, and prepare them for use. Eventually, they developed needles made from bone, thin enough and sharp enough to actually sew hides together into fitted garments, rather than just draping fur loosely over their shoulders like a blanket. That shift from draped to fitted clothing is a much bigger leap than it sounds. A draped hide leaks heat constantly, especially around the neck, wrists, and legs. A sewn layered garment traps warm air directly against the skin, the exact same principle a modern winter coat uses today. This wasn't a small tweak, it was closer to reinventing what clothing even meant. And we're not just guessing about when this started. Genetic evidence actually backs this up in a surprisingly clever way. Scientists have studied the evolutionary history of human body lice, a parasite that lives only in clothing, not on skin or in hair, like head lice do. By tracing exactly when body lice genetically split off from head lice as a separate species, researchers estimate humans started regularly wearing clothing somewhere around 170,000 years ago. That's not a guess pulled from cave paintings or a lucky archaeological find. It's lice literally telling us through their own DNA when humans got dressed. And clothing didn't stay simple after that first invention. In colder regions, later humans, including the ancestors of early Arctic populations, developed full multi-layer clothing systems. An inner layer to trap body heat close to the skin, an outer layer specifically designed to block wind and snow, separate coverings built just for hands and feet, since fingers and toes are usually the first parts of the body to suffer frostbite. And in some of the coldest, brightest environments, snow goggles carved from bone or wood, with only a narrow slit to look through, specifically to prevent snow blindness caused by intense sunlight reflecting off endless white ice. This wasn't crude survival gear thrown together out of desperation. In many real ways, it was the ancient equivalent of modern thermal winter wear, built entirely from animal hide, sinew, and bone, refined and passed down over generations until it worked. Shelter was the next piece of the puzzle, and just like clothing, humans didn't wait for evolution to hand them a solution. In a lot of colder regions, humans didn't build homes entirely from scratch. They used what the environment already offered them. Caves and rock overhangs were natural, ready-made shelters that blocked wind and held in warmth from a fire far more effectively than open ground ever could. A cave with a fire near the entrance could stay noticeably warmer than the freezing air outside, even during the harshest storms. Where caves weren't available, groups built structures from whatever materials were on hand. In parts of Ice Age Europe, archaeologists have actually found the remains of shelters built from mammoth bones and tusks, deliberately stacked and arranged into a frame, almost certainly covered with hides to block wind and trap heat inside. Building a shelter out of the skeleton of the very animal you hunted for food is about as resourceful as prehistoric survival gets. In colder tundra regions, humans also dug partially into the ground itself, since the earth just below the surface stays noticeably warmer and more stable than exposed air above it. This same basic trick, using the ground's natural insulation, is still used in some traditional cold climate homes even today. Food was another massive winter challenge, arguably one of the hardest to solve. Plants mostly disappear in winter, so cold-adapted human groups had to shift almost entirely toward meat and stored fat to survive the season. Hunting large animals like mammoths, bison, and reindeer wasn't just about getting food for the day, it was about securing survival for the entire group across weeks or even months. A single successful large kill could feed a group for a long stretch of winter, and fat in particular became an incredibly valuable resource since fat provides far more calories per bite than lean meat, which matters enormously when your body is already burning extra energy simply to stay warm around the clock. Some groups also figured out early methods of food preservation, essentially solving the problem of how to make a good hunt last. Meat could be frozen naturally in ice or packed snow, turning the brutal cold itself into a giant natural freezer that required no extra effort to maintain. Smoking and drying meat over a fire was another method, removing moisture so food could be stored and eaten weeks later without spoiling, getting a group through the leanest, harshest stretches of the season when hunting was difficult or impossible. None of this worked in isolation, though. Surviving an Ice Age winter completely alone was nearly impossible. Groups relied on each other constantly, sharing food after a big kill so no one went without, taking turns keeping a fire burning through the long night so it never went out, and passing down survival knowledge from older, experienced members of the group to the younger ones coming up behind them. Knowing where animals migrated in winter, which plants were still safe to eat, how to read a changing sky before a storm hit, none of that was instinct. It was learned, remembered, tested, and taught, generation after generation, refined slightly each time. In many ways, human intelligence and social cooperation were just as critical to surviving winter as fire, clothing, or shelter ever were. And this is really the core of the whole story. Humans didn't survive brutal Ice Age winters by evolving thick fur or a heavy layer of blubber like the animals actually built for the cold. Almost every winter survival tool humans developed, fire, clothing, shelter, food preservation, cooperation, was cultural, not biological. We didn't out-evolve the cold the way a woolly mammoth or an Arctic fox did. We out-taught it. That's arguably one of the most important shifts in the entire story of human evolution. Other animals adapt to their environment over thousands of generations through slow genetic change, waiting for random mutations to slowly tilt the odds in their favor. Humans figured out how to adapt the environment around themselves instead, and to pass that knowledge on almost instantly compared to evolutionary timescales. A single useful idea, a better way to sew a hide, a smarter shelter design, a more efficient way to preserve meat could spread through a group and be improved on within a single generation, not thousands of them. That single shift, the ability to survive through invention and shared knowledge rather than waiting on biology to catch up, this what allowed humans to eventually live in nearly every climate on Earth, from deserts to rainforests to the harshest reaches of the Arctic Circle itself. So the next time you're complaining about putting on a jacket before walking outside on a cold morning, remember that jacket represents one of the oldest and most important survival technologies our species ever came up with. Ancient humans didn't outlast the Ice Age because their bodies were built for it. They outlasted it because they were smart enough to build what their bodies couldn't. If you like this, go check out Why Did Humans Stop Having Fur? It connects directly to this one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.